In the winter of 2014, the most feared man in Seoul stood alone in a penthouse overlooking the Han River. Snow drifted slowly past the glass. The city lights shimmered below him like something within reach, something he believed he owned. His name was Kang Min-jae. At 38 years old, he controlled nightclubs in Gangnam, shipping routes through Incheon, and debts that powerful men prayed they could repay on time. Politicians greeted him quietly. Businessmen feared disappointing him. He had built an empire without ever raising his voice. But on that cold night, he wasn't looking at the city like a king. He was looking at it like a man who had run out of allies. 3 hours later, everything he built would begin to collapse. And it wasn't because he lacked power, it was because he had too much pride. Min-jae wasn't born powerful. He grew up in a cramped apartment in eastern Seoul. The walls were thin, the ceiling paint was peeling. Winter felt colder inside than outside. His father worked long hours at a repair shop, coming home with grease still trapped in the lines of his hands. His mother cleaned office buildings at night, leaving before sunset and returning when most of the city was asleep. There were no luxuries, no connections, no protection. At 16, Min-jae learned a lesson that would shape the rest of his life. Respect is not given to the weak. He learned it in school hallways where laughter followed him. He learned it when teachers overlooked him. He learned it watching his father lower his eyes to men with more money. Bullied, dismissed, overlooked. One night, standing in front of a cracked mirror in that tiny apartment, he made himself a promise. He would never feel small again. In his 20s, he stepped into the shadows of Gangnam. He started as a collector for small underground gambling houses, the kind hidden beneath bright streets and neon lights. Other collectors used fists, they shouted, they broke things. Min-jae did something different. He watched, he listened, he learned who owed money and why. He learned which men were desperate and which were pretending. He spoke softly, he negotiated quietly, and when necessary, he made decisions that lasted longer than bruises. Within 5 years, he was no longer collecting debts, he was controlling who owed them. Power found him because he understood something simple and dangerous. Fear is louder than kindness. By the age of 32, Min-jae had built alliances across South Seoul. He didn't shout, he didn't threaten publicly. He made examples, quietly. One betrayal led to a disappearance no one questioned out loud. One disloyal partner watched his businesses collapse overnight as investors mysteriously pulled out and doors closed without explanation. Soon, the underworld began calling him the Silent King, and for a while, the name fit perfectly. He reinvested his profits into legitimate businesses, luxury restaurants, nightclubs, private security firms. To the public, he was a rising entrepreneur, disciplined, ambitious, impressive. To the underworld, he was untouchable. But power does something dangerous to a man who has fought his whole life to escape weakness. It whispers, "You are different, you are smarter, you cannot fall." And slowly, Min-jae began to believe it. The mistake that changed everything did not come from weakness, it came from ego. An older crime boss from Busan proposed a partnership, access to port routes, expanded trade channels, shared protection. It was strategic, profitable, smart. But Min-jae had already begun to see himself as above compromise. At a private dinner, in front of lieutenants and guards, he leaned back in his chair and said calmly, "I don't share power." The room fell silent. That single sentence did more damage than any weapon ever could. Humiliation creates enemies faster than greed. The Busan boss did not argue. He did not threaten. He simply nodded and waited. Meanwhile, Min Jae became harsher, more suspicious, more distant. He began doubting loyal men who had stood beside him for years, replacing old allies with newer ones who feared him more than they respected him, punishing minor mistakes severely as if harshness alone could secure loyalty. The empire still looked strong from the outside, but the foundation was beginning to crack. Then the problems began. A warehouse was raided unexpectedly. A money courier was intercepted on a route that was supposed to be secure. A trusted lieutenant disappeared without warning. Police pressure increased. Rival groups grew bold in neighborhoods they once avoided. Min Jae blamed betrayal, but he could not see the truth standing directly in front of him. Pride had isolated him. The men who once would have risked their lives for him were now afraid to speak honestly, and fear without loyalty is temporary power. The alliance he had mocked in Busan did not forget. It quietly funded his rivals. Information was leaked, routes were exposed, weak points were studied and exploited. The empire began shrinking from the inside out. Back to that winter night in 2014. Min Jae stood alone in his penthouse. His phone rang endlessly on the marble table. Law enforcement was closing in. Allies were unreachable. Accounts were frozen. Clubs were raided. Ships were seized. For the first time in years, there were no guards in the hallway, no loyal second-in-command waiting for instructions, only silence. And in that silence, clarity arrived. Power had built his empire, but pride had burned every bridge that could have saved it. When the fall came, it came fast. Within weeks, his network disintegrated. Arrests, asset seizures, public scandal. The silent king became tomorrow's headline, and then yesterday's memory. Min Jae survived, but survival was not victory. He lost everything that made him feared, and fear was all he had built. Years later, people in Seoul barely remembered his name. New bosses rose, new alliances formed, new empires expanded beneath the same city lights. The city never stops moving. But somewhere in a small, quiet apartment, a man once called Untouchable lives anonymously. No penthouse, no bodyguards, no whispered greetings from powerful men. Just silence. He was not destroyed by rivals. He was not defeated by police. He was undone by the one enemy he never learned to control: his pride. Because power can lift you to the top, but pride makes sure you fall alone.